And greetings, everyone. I bring you warm greetings from the Gulf of Maine, one of the most rapidly warming places on the planet. And it's really wonderful to be here. I'm really inspired by the ideas, the innovations, the suggestions of what's needed to respond to a rapidly warming planet. And we'll be talking about this and what the pathway might be. But before I do that, I just want to thank Rob Stouter, who came to a design charrette this summer and suggested that this geodesign conference would be something that could be really useful. And for Ryan, who, as we suggested this idea, invited us to this process. And it's also Stuart Cowan and I who are back to back. And thank you for lining us up in the roster this way, because we're really aligned. And this is an example of a geodesign collaboration, and one that's really intended towards regeneration. So I'd like to actually go back to Jack's opening talk yesterday. How many of you attended that opening plenary? All right, that was pretty inspiring. And there were some words that he said that I'd like to reconnect with. He said he had a goal for every organization in the world to have access to the most powerful geospatial or geographic information available. He said, and we need to create an intelligent and responsive platform for the world, like your brain, your central nervous system that senses things, cognates and understands, and more intelligently responds or creates better understanding, supports collaboration, and systemic action. That's what we're going to talk about. It's an invitation to reimagine that idea and to think, well, what's possible? Well, one of the things we know is this is perhaps the most critical decade for mankind. No big deal. It is a big deal. It's a really big deal. So as we look ahead, what are we looking at? Well, the COP26 is coming up in Glasgow, and that's Paris plus 5 years. That's a huge milestone. Also, the UN Food Summit in 2021, major issue about the integration of food systems. In 2022, we have Rio plus 30, which is an incredibly big deal. So this is not just about our elections here in this country. This is about global people coming together and defining the trajectory of the world. There's also a little thing called the Olympic Games that are coming here in 2028. What an opportunity for geodesign. And then, of course, 2030, and 10 years from now, it's the decade when the SDGs need to be attained. Wow. How are we going to do that? Well, geodesign has huge opportunities to actually contribute to that process, and that's what this talk is all about. But one of the key reasons why this is the most perhaps critical decade for humanity is as we think a little bit further, well, what does it really look like? What does 2050 look like? Well, some of the small island states, we may lose as many as 20 countries. Lose. Maybe about 60 cities will be underwater. 1.5 billion people displaced. The decade ahead. So, as we consider this decade ahead, how do we then apply the principles of geodesign towards a regenerative future? And both Stuart and I are going to we're going to use that word. That word has come up and it's surfaced several times throughout yesterday and today, I'm sure through the IGC meetings, it has as well. But this is a key idea, and so we're going to be really asking about this. What are the principles of geodesign, and how can we actually apply them? But if we're really serious about applying this, we also need to realize that we don't have it all wired. We don't have it all figured out. We're going to need to commit to a learning and adaptation process. How do we learn and adapt as we go? So I'm going to take you on a bit of a deep dive. This is a bit of my story and how I came here, but also how we can actually leverage this thinking towards a rather big idea. So I grew up in the coast of Maine, and I fell in love with coastal systems. And this was around the time of the Clean Water Act here in the US, where mitigation was a real opportunity. And so I actually began in the field and studied and applied the work in coastal restoration. I did a lot of large-scale coastal dune restoration, tidal marsh, seagrass, you name it, riverine, forests. Started out with what was before biohabitats, but then actually became the director of conservation, the first director of conservation at the National Aquarium in Baltimore. And that opened up huge opportunities to do a lot more with things like mangrove restoration, coral reef restoration, and a lot of work with marine biodiversity, fisheries, but also really exposing me to the human dimension and the reality of governance as a key aspect that really sort of controls our response to ecosystem change. In that process, it was really amazing to have all these exhibits. And this was a sort of an early idea around geodesign that to think, well, I wonder if we could actually do a real-time display of data in these exhibits. Well, there was an incredible meeting with Jack Dangermond when he came to the aquarium, and we talked about this, and he said, wow, what a great idea. Let's see if we can actually work that out together. So for a brief period, I worked very closely with him and the team from Esri, and we actually created what was really the first real-time displays, and we also shared it with the community, a lot of our community work, but we were using, back in the day, CD-ROMs. Remember those? Some of you out there, some of you graduate students may not remember what those are, but it was really important and it was really key. But when I was at this position, it really began to make me ask the question, okay, when we're really looking at the global challenges ahead, is it all just about getting people, we had roughly 2 million people come through the doors every year, to just see these exhibits? So I felt there were other people who could actually do my job after serving there for 10 years, and I felt I wanted to go and explore it and really understand how do we actually measure human response to ecosystem change. And I didn't really see anyone out there doing it, so perhaps somewhat stupidly, because it was an amazing job, I decided to figure it out. So I opened a business. But I opened the business at the absolute worst time to ever open a business. Do not ever open a business when there's a financial meltdown going on around the world. That's one little bit of advice. But in that process, I knew I had to figure out and learn all about this field that I had heard about called evaluation. What is this field? What does it do? How does it really work? So in order to understand this field, I looked around to see who were the sort of the Jedi masters, and I realized there was one in particular, this guy, Michael Quinn Patton. And yes, he indeed is a key pollinator of great ideas, but he's been at this field for years. If you've not heard of him, you should look him up, you should write the name down, because what he has basically done is contributed to the field, but he's constantly pushing the bounds of the field of program evaluation. Things like qualitative research and evaluation methods, utilization-focused evaluation, the essentials of utilization-focused evaluation. And the point there is make evaluations useful, not just serve the accountability domain. But also, for me, this was the most critical book, was Developmental Evaluation, because he was using a lot of wisdom from the ecosystem approach to management. Things like the Hollings adaptive cycle to understand complexity. So really digging in, digging back into systems change and understanding the incredible world of how to apply systems thinking and complexity to somewhat linear thinking in program evaluation. After that came the principles-focused evaluation, realizing that rules, when you're dealing with complex adaptive systems, rules really didn't suffice. You had to actually apply principles. But most recently, it's been a collaboration that he and I have been working on with several other people to bring to the field something that is really significant, and you should all be aware of as you're considering geodesign. And that's blue marble evaluation. Because what basically this book does is it takes the field of evaluation that's largely been focused on projects and programs and really applies it to human response to ecosystem change in a very key and thoughtful way. It's not about a single method. It's really about a philosophy. And it's about integration across many different fields. So truly is an transdisciplinary opportunity to really understand and learn from. So no single person can be the sort of the wisdom keeper of all this. It really does take a wide variety of people involved, and there's no single individual who says, I am the evaluator of this project. It really requires everyone involved in these complex systems work to be part of the evaluative process to how do we adapt and learn as we implement. This is a key aspect of Blue Marble. Well, it's also rooted in core principles that actually undergird the work. So, global thinking. apply whole Earth, big picture thinking to all aspects of systems change. So this is not just thinking about how do we make the current world just work a little bit better. This is asking what kind of world are we in and what direction are we going and how do we apply this big picture thinking to whatever work we're doing with evaluative rigor. The Anthropocene is context. Know and face the realities of the Anthropocene and act accordingly. This is a big idea. We are in the Anthropocene. I'm sure you've all heard that term. Think about what it means and think about how it relates to your work. And that's really the core principle. How does the projects, programs that are actually aiming to transform systems act in accordance to the realities of the Anthropocene? Transformative engagement. Engage consistent with the magnitude, direction, and speed of transformations needed and envisioned. This is really important. Now, what this requires is not some sort of expert to come in and sort of assess the system. It really requires a sort of a curation of understanding, a steward, a net weaver, people who understands the different networks, scales, different actors and agencies involved. Critically important. And then, so what does that mean? And what is the magnitude, direction, and speed of transformation? Not just small-scale systems change, but large-scale systems change. The overarching integration, think in terms of whatever your project or program or initiative is, it's related to and bounded by systems. So understanding that and understanding the integration in the design, in the engagement, and the evaluation of large-scale systems change and initiatives that are truly trying to transform and shift the directionality. This is a cloud forest, by the way, in Talamanca, Costa Rica. There's Jeremy's in the room. He gave a wonderful presentation on cloud forests yesterday. But this is all about, what we're talking about here is acting locally. And this is a word that combines global and local. And so whatever you're doing, having a sense of what the implications are at a global scale and the systems that interrelate with those. So global systems change must be contextually sensitive and grounded in the interactions between local and global processes and scales of change. We do a lot of work around the world, and for us, the coastal ecosystem is really the crucible of change. And so engaging there, this is also where the goods and services of the natural system are their highest, and where, as we've learned throughout the past days and throughout our careers, this is where humanity is living. Over half of the world's population live within 100 miles of the coast. So understanding and working in these coastal communities is critically important. And some examples, and Stuart will go into some depth on some of these examples, but in South Devon, UK, they've just declared a climate emergency at the county level. So it's a critical policy direction, but they don't necessarily know what to do once they've actually announced a climate emergency. So a key aspect is thinking, okay, let's bring in this blue marble evaluation and apply it and think about it as we go and do our geo-design of what it is and how we can actually act and react in that system. Down in the sub-Saharan part of Africa, in the Gulf of Guinea current, one of the most productive systems on the planet, marine systems, where 66% roughly of the people in Ghana depend upon marine fisheries for their protein in their diet. That system is close to collapse, and there's been large offshore oil that's been discovered. So the development of that oil fields could easily follow the Niger Delta. Well, these communities there are actually working and applying the principles of blue marble evaluation to shift that, to change the systems. And what they're doing is they're looking at the governance dimensions, the governance of fisheries, the governance of the coastal zone, and we're working with them on that process. Costa Rica, this is, we're working both, Stuart will be talking about the government of Costa Rica, but in the Osa Peninsula, working and applying the principles of blue marble evaluation. This is roughly 1.5% of the world's biodiversity is just in this one peninsula. And so applying the principles of blue marble evaluation to guide the design thinking as it moves forward is critical. And then, of course, the Gulf of Maine, as I mentioned, one of the most rapidly warming systems on the planet, and a $1.6 billion lobster industry that could easily crash in the next 10, 15 years. So this global principle really does ask us to think about a shifting of the paradigms from reductionist to comprehensive, from short-term to long-term. This is not easy, by the way, nor is there a lot of funding for this kind of long-term thinking, but we've got to change that. Separation from living systems to coevolution, non-sustainable to regenerative, scarcity to abundance, narrow self-interest to prosperity of the commons, from a nation state to global community. So that's what the paradigm shift requires, and that's what we believe this decade of geodesign ahead really needs. So as we think about this, we think about the learning communities, and I'm really impressed with this particular conference because in the announcement, it's seeing clearly in 2020, making smarter decisions. So this was designed to bring folks together around this, recognizing that you're all change actors. Every one of you are working in some dimension of change. A key question is, how do we bring that together? Are we going to continue our work and maybe just come together for a conference? Or is there any way at all to come together and really work together on some of these common problems? So that's a key design challenge. And then I go back to what Jack said. Every organization to provide access to the most powerful geospatial information available. That's a big idea. Well, there's another person, another pioneer, and I don't think I heard his name spoken over the last couple days, but I want to bring him up, introduce Buckminster Fuller and his work and his incredible dedication to what he called the world game. Back from 1965 to 75, he actually had a decade of design, of comprehensive anticipatory design. I think we can easily put that word geodesign in there. And he was an absolute pioneer, but perhaps his time, he just had this idea too early, because at that time when he had conceptualized this, there was no internet. There was no artificial intelligence, no nanotechnology, no Internet of Things. And what was incredible about this vision, he actually came up with this idea not from an abundance, but really from deepening his connection and understanding to war, to conflict. He was in the Naval War College at Annapolis and really studied wargaming. He thought, this is absolutely ridiculous. We've got to transform this. We've got to change the paradigm. We've got to change the way we see this entire engagement and stop this conflict and somehow come together. Well, he even had a visual that he used for how then to think about it. You can see it there, the Dymaxion map, a phenomenally interesting map. And for me, it also helps to explain human migration as you see the connectivity of the way that the Earth is re-envisioned. So the world game and Blue Marble evaluation, we think it's time to reimagine it. I think Jack laid it out brilliantly in his keynote to think, is there a way to come together, to think together, that makes the invisible visible, to bring as many people together as possible, revealing vital patterns and relationships, combining human foresight and ingenuity with computer and visualization tools to invent the future with a core purpose. Do you remember what the core purpose, for those of you who knew about the world game? To make the world work for 100% of humanity in the shortest possible time through spontaneous cooperation without ecological offense or the disadvantage of anyone. I mean, that's the mic drop right there. I mean, it's incredible, absolutely incredible. What a visionary statement to be had in the middle of the 60s. Let's unpack that a little bit to make the world work. Well, we're talking about designing, geodesign, adaptation, learning from transformational change interventions for 100% of humanity in the shortest possible time. That means things like intervene at the scale and depth that are demanded by the interconnected problems and integrate them and think about problem deadlines, not just our own deadlines or the client's deadlines, but what are the real challenges of the deadlines we're facing as global partners, global communities? Through spontaneous cooperation. So this is really important. Account for the human complexity in the design of interventions. So this is a quote, "We are the first generation to know we are destroying the planet and the last generation that can do anything about it." That's pretty heavy. That's from the World Wildlife Fund, 2018. But it's absolutely critical. There is an urgency. Working as usual, it's not going to get us there. So how do we actually change the game? How many of you remember this? Not everybody, some, okay, all right. So basically what this is the labyrinth, right? The labyrinth. You use two hands and you try to sort of adjust the aspects of the game. Well, this is really what we're facing in the Anthropocene. We're facing a similar challenge. This is the ball in the basin theming, and it's basically the planet has been in a stable state in the Pleistocene. As it's come into the Holocene, and with human development, we've actually created a deepening, basically a hole. And so the game here is to actually change and move that dimension so that the Earth system is moving towards a stabilized Earth. This is the game. This is the challenge we have ahead. So the world game community is ready. Oh my gosh, the gaming world, there's something in the order of 3.6 billion people who are gamers. Roughly, it's a gender balance. More men than women early age, but women outplay men in older ages, and I think they're quite better at it. So what do we think? How do we actually engage? Well, the world community, the world gaming community is actually ready in terms of young people, schools and universities, nonprofits, companies, government agencies, etc. So it's a matter of really thinking about this integration challenge. What does it mean to bring these different groups together? It's an emergent process where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. I'm just going to read one final quote. We are now faced with the fact that tomorrow is today. We are confronted with a fierce urgency of now. In this unfolding conundrum of life and history, there is such a thing as being too late. This is no time for apathy or complacency. This is a time for vigorous and positive action. Does that ring familiar? Martin Luther King, 1967, Beyond Vietnam, a time to break silence. So we have a 10-year plan, and we'd love for you to join us. So get out your phones or be prepared to write down. I'm going to have a QR code in a minute and a tiny URL if you'd like to take it down. We'd love to if you're interested, we'll just share information. We'll talk about the global networks we're working with, talk about the actions and what we're doing to engage with this wider global community. We actually have an emerging network. And in fact, we have a global network of folks actually committed to transformation systems mapping and analysis. We're just in the scoping phase, but we'll likely kick off in like April, May of this year. So if you're interested, let us know. It's an exciting global community, it's an incredible time, and it's a very diverse community with many different perspectives. So, a decade for geodesign. How big can we think? How bold can we be? What can we do together? Okay, I do have one more quote from Ian McHarg. This is his final autobiography, at the very end, The Quest for Life. We must come to know this world, to understand how it works and regulate our behavior to maintain and enhance the biosphere. We must identify the welts, the lesions, the wounds, and the suppurations on the global epidermis. We must learn to green the earth, to restore the earth, to heal the earth. I long to live to see it. So, here's the invitation. Here's the QR code. Here's a tiny URL. Stuart, you're up.